When I drew nigh the Nameless city, I knew it was accursed. From afar I saw it, protruding uncannily above the sands, as parts of a corpse may protrude from an ill-made grave. Remote, in the desert of Araby, lies the Nameless city, crumbling and inarticulate. It must have been thus before the first stones of Memphis were laid, and while the bricks of Babylon were yet unbaked. There is no legend so old as to give it a name, or to recall that it was ever alive. But it is told of in whispers around campfires, and muttered about by the grandams in the tents of sheiks. My imagination seethed as I traversed that unvocal stone place. That place too old for Egypt and Meroe to remember. That place for which I alone of living men had seen. Night had approached when I came upon the facades of several small, squat rock houses or temples. Yet my curiosity was stronger than fear, so I did not flee from the long moon cast shadows. The terrific force of an icy wind poured madly out of the dark door, sighing uncannily as it rustled the sand. When finally all was at rest again, a presence seemed to stalk among the spectral stones of the city. The cavern was indeed a temple, and I beheld plain signs of the race that had lived before the desert was a desert. I found a small door chiseled in the solid rock, and thrusting my torch within, I beheld a rough flight of deeply descending steps. The words and warnings of Arab prophets seemed to float to me from across the desert. The narrow passage led infinitely down like some hideous haunted well, and time had quite ceased to exist when my feet again felt a level floor. All at once I saw the dim outlines of the corridor. This hall was no relic of crudity like the temples in the city above. Rich, vivid, and daringly fantastic designs and pictures formed a continuous scheme of mural paintings whose lines and colors were beyond description. The sides were lined with cases containing the mummified forms of creatures outreaching in grotesqueness, the most chaotic dreams of man. I could trace a history of the Nameless city, the tale of a mighty seacoast metropolis that ruled the world before Africa rose out of the waves. As the desert crept into the fertile valley that held it, its people were driven to chisel their way down through the rocks to another world whereof their prophets had told them. The paradisal scenes portrayed a hidden world of eternal day filled with glorious cities and ethereal hills and valleys. Then, at last, I saw signs of an artistic anticlimax. Emaciated priests cursed the upper air and all who breathed it, and one terrible final scene showed a primitive-looking man, torn to pieces. I cried aloud in transcendent amazement, for there was only an illimitable void of uniform radiance. Life had once teemed in these caverns, and in the luminous realm beyond. Then began a deep, low moaning, as of a distant throng of condemned spirits. As more and more madly the shrieking night wind began to pour into that gulf of the inner earth. In the fiendish clawing of the swirling currents there seemed to abide a vindictive rage, all the stronger because it was largely impotent. The voices of the rushing blast presently seemed to take articulate form behind me. And down there in the grave of unnumbered aeon-dead antiquities, I heard
the ghastly cursing and snarling of strange-tongued fiends. Turning, I saw outlined in the luminous ether of the abyss a nightmare horde of rushing devils. Hate distorted, grotesquely panoplied, half-transparent beings of a race no man might mistake. The crawling reptiles of the Nameless City.
As the wind died away, I was plunged into ghoul-peopled blackness. For the great brazen door clanged shut with a deafening peal, whose reverberation swelled out into the distant world to hail the rising sun, as Memnon hails it from the banks of the Nile.